Apparently I'm not changing my background since it kicked me out changing it the first time.
How's your remodeling going?
Done. I'm scheduling moving back in tomorrow.
Yeah, we're on.
All right, so everyone, we are now live. So welcome everyone to the November 12th, 2020 Campbell Union High School District Board meeting. This may be obvious, but we are recording this meeting and live streaming it on the internet. And so if you interact with this meeting, your likeness will show up on that recording. Can we please have a roll call or a call to order, or actually a roll call? Let's do a roll call.
Sure. Trustee Gallagher.
I'm here.
Trustee Aerosmith.
Here.
Trustee Brown.
Present.
Trustee Goitia.
Here.
And Trustee Verich.
Here.
All right, we're all here. If anyone would like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, let me know. And if not,
I will.
Okay, great. So if everyone could mute their lines, and Trustee Goitia will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you, Linda. That takes us to item 1D, the adoption of tonight's agenda. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
All right, so a motion by Christina, a second by Robert. Is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, can we please have a roll call vote?
Trustee Gallagher.
Aye.
Trustee Aerosmith.
Aye.
Trustee Brown.
Aye.
Trustee Goitia.
Aye.
Trustee Verich.
Aye.
All right, with a 5-0 vote, we have an agenda. Item 1E is public comments. We do have some blue cards tonight, so give me 1 second just to see if they're agendized items or not. And I think they all are. So let's go ahead and we'll move on to item 2A, the Santa Clara County Committee on School District Organization Election for District 2, 4, and at-large seats. Trustees, have y'all received the different candidates? I can't remember if you received that via email. You did?
Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
So we can vote or not vote. I think typically we just leave it up to the board, and then I fill out this piece of paper and then send it in. So let's start with District 2. District 2, there is one candidate, Baltazar Lopez. Is there any opposition to voting for him?
No.
Great. And then at large, we have Albert Gonzalez, and he's the only candidate. Is there any opposition there?
No.
Okay, great. So that leaves District 4. So District 4 has two candidates, and in the order they're on the sheet is Brian Wheatley, and number 2 is Jody Muirhead. Any thoughts from the board?
I would like to support Jody Muirhead.
So would I.
Not.
Okay, so I won't even go into why. We have 3 votes.
There's
And the
three.
fourth would be, I know Jody. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we all know Jody. She's been doing good work. She's been expanding her. She's been volunteering for a lot of governance types of things and things like that. And I think she's the one I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, any other thoughts? All right, just really quick for me, I agree. I think both are good. I think she, though, has been doing this a while, has really shown a lot of leadership in her district. I think understands some of the like border neighborhood issues that we face as a district. And I think would be a good thing for our kids if she was advocating on behalf of them. So with that, yeah, let's do it. We can do it that way because then it's more formal.
Okay, great. I move to vote for Baltasar Lopez, Jody Muirhead, and Albert Gonzalez.
I second.
All right, so there's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, can we please get a roll call vote, Dr. Bravo?
Muted.
Trustee Gallagher,
Aye.
Trustee Aerosmith,
Aye.
Trustee Brown,
Aye.
Trustee Goitia,
Aye.
Trustee Verich.
Aye.
All right, and so with a 5-0 vote, those will get sent in tomorrow. That moves us to item 3A, and this is our board workshop, a study session on the science of COVID-19 and the impact on schools. Dr. Bravo, does it make more sense to do the public comment first and then do the framing, or do you want to do the framing and then move to the public comment?
You're muted, Bob.
Muted again.
How about now? Okay, I think it makes sense to do the public comment first.
Okay, great. So we do have 5 members of the community who have filled out the card. So we'll stick to the 3 minutes per person. So John, if you could get James Lucas on the phone. Everyone else, I'll just mute you for now, and then. Cool.
All right, Keon, I have James here.
All right, hi James, you're on with the board. You're streaming live on the internet. You have 3 minutes. At the end of 3 minutes, the mic will mute. And so if you have additional comments, just please send them to the board and you can take it away.
All right. Thank you, trustees. I actually have a 1-minute statement prepared because I was assuming that's what we were going to have tonight. But first of all, I'd like to start with thanking you for hearing me here tonight. I'd like to say that 51 Del Mar teachers signed a letter asking you to vote for distance learning for spring 2021. I know you expect this is because we're scared of spreading this disease, which, because data, we are. Instead, your experience as trustees informs you of Del Mar's exceptional focus on student success, including our Black and Brown students. You know how much personal time we give. It should carry significant weight when 75% of our teachers say distance learning is in the best interest of students. Transforming a curriculum to deliver standards-based instruction with rigor, fidelity, and vigor is not easy. We make it appear seamless. Trustees, you need to experience our reality. While teaching 32 students, we respond to private chat, remind, and more, all while providing tech support to students unable to log in. Seamless is professionals spending countless hours refining their craft. Hybrid or in-person will be the worst of both worlds. Through distance learning, we can interact with students equally, providing the best overall learning experience for our students. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Our next speaker will be Stephen Turner.
All right, I have Stephen Turner on the phone.
All right, hi Stephen, you're on with the board. You're streaming on the internet. You have 3 minutes. At the end of 3 minutes, the line will mute. And so if you have additional comments, please just email them over to the board and you can take it away.
All right, thank you. I'm Stephen Turner. I'm a teacher at Branham. I want to thank everyone for giving me this opportunity to speak. I just want to bring up a few concerns and then some suggestions potentially that I haven't, I don't know the entire process at this point. So do a little info on that, and then a couple other things I want to note on the models. So the main concerns that were addressed by my colleague at Del Mar was uptick in COVID cases. I'm sure that you're all keeping that under advisory, but I think that with so many variables right now, it'd be very difficult to drastically change the way we're approaching teaching right now. The other large concern I have is miscommunication and adjustment periods in the case that COVID is found on a site. The struggle of the information out to our community has been very difficult during these times, with students not responding to emails, parents being hard to reach, and this would be very difficult if we were to change the modality of our teaching partway through the year. I don't know how fast or responsive families would react if they learned that someone at school had COVID, and I'd be concerned about people not reporting if they think that they might have COVID. The other concern was if we do a partial, if we choose what groups would attend on campus. When I was talking over the summer with the reopening committee, we had some concerns about how we would balance targeting students that need it without isolating them from their peers and making them feel like they had to go because they were of a certain demographic or something like that. And that was a concern we had. For the hybrid, I believe you called it concurrent scenario, I have a lot of concerns that the quality of the education I provide would be reduced, such that it would be difficult to maintain anything happening at the same time. Particularly, the students in the classroom would most likely just be relegated to doing what their peers online would be doing, so there would be really no academic benefit for them to be in person. If a student raises their hand on campus versus a student raising their hand on Zoom, I'm just going to go back and forth. It's not going to be any different. I'm not going to prioritize students in person or people online. So I don't really see any benefit for them being in school. In fact, in my particular subject area of computer science, it would actually be a detriment. A lot of my students are using family materials in order to proceed in class, if the Chromebooks are insufficient. So I would have split materials, some at school and some at home, and students would actually be unable to follow my curriculum in particular. Some of the recommendations I have is building upon what is working instead of starting over. As someone that's gone through multiple pilots of things and multiple curriculum changes and different schools, it is very difficult to start over. So I highly recommend that if we switch to another learning, I highly recommend that if we continue to find what is doing well in this and maximize what we can while supporting the students that are struggling, that would be the best course of action. If we start up a hybrid model and then have reported COVID,
You're muted.
Sorry, I was muted. Stephen, that is time. So the line muted, but if you do have additional thoughts, it sounds like you do, please send them to the board. You can email all of us or just me, and I'll send it around to the board after the meeting. And thank you very much. We're going to move on to our next public comment, which is from Meredith Allen.
okay.
All right, I have Meredith here.
All right. Hi, Meredith. You're on with the board. You have 3 minutes whenever you start. And at that point, the line will mute. And so if you have additional comments, please email them over to the board because we want to hear them. And you can take it away when you're ready.
Great. Hi, my name is Meredith Allen. I'm the math department chair at Branham High School. And I just want to apologize for not picking up the phone. Last week, I had a toddler situation that pulled me away for just enough time to miss that phone call. So I really apologize. To start, please understand that like so many staff, parents, and students, I want very much to return to the classroom. I'm more than ready to go back to how things were before COVID-19. Unfortunately, with the current lack of vaccine and spiking COVID cases, school would not be as it was before. I hear a lot of concern from the district office, administration, and parents about the need to do what's best for students, which I absolutely agree is a top priority. What's often missing from this sentiment is recognizing that when teachers don't feel safe and supported, we're not able to be our best for our students. The idea of returning to in-person instruction makes the vast majority of us feel unsafe and unsupported. We are worried about finding childcare for our young children. We're worried about the threat of COVID-19 to our lives and the lives of our families. I'm not ready to take the risk on of contact with hundreds of students each week. I'm concerned that there's an inadequate personal protective equipment, and we'll certainly not see any federal funding in the next few months. with this current administration. We'd be returning to school at the height of flu season after the holidays when many students have been in contact with extended family. The weather will be cold, yet we'll have to keep our doors and windows open to increase airflow. Not to mention how hard it is to get my own 14-year-old niece to take social distancing seriously. The fact is that not everyone can or will follow safety protocols, and teachers would assume a great deal more risk at school than any other staff member, administrator, or board member. In closing, I want to remind everyone that teachers are incredibly strong and resilient. We have gone through years of active shooter trainings. We support and counsel our students in crisis. We buy them food and supplies with our own money. We consistently work beyond contract hours to be the best in the classroom. We've worked countless extra hours to learn Canvas and redesign our courses for distance learning through a pandemic. We've evacuated our homes during recent fires. We're grieving the loss of both a teacher and a student at Branham High School. Yet we keep showing up every day for our students. We do not give up and shy away from challenges, but we're exhausted. And a return to school before it is safe is simply asking too much. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. All right, our next speaker is Donetta Torresillas.
All right, I have Donetta here.
All right, hey, you're on with the board. You have 3 minutes, at which point the line will mute. And so if you have additional comments, please email them to the board, and you can get started when you're ready.
Okay, I'm reading this for another teacher. Her name is Meredith Allen, the mathematics department chair at Branham High School. It says, to start, please understand that like many other staff, parents, and students, I want very much to return to the classroom. Distant teaching has been a huge struggle for me, and I am more than ready to go back to how things were before COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, this is not what would happen. School would not be like before. The change in the classroom environment, returning to the classroom in January would not be the same as it was before COVID-19. There would be no full classroom of students with collaborative groups and interactive activities. I would not be able to circulate the room safely to support and guide small groups while they investigate and discuss new mathematical concepts. This would not be normal school, but rather some strange new combination of distance learning while in person. The logistics would be a huge challenge. Teachers would have to redesign the structure of the curriculum again halfway through the year, and students would have to adapt to yet another routine. We are finally getting into a routine with distance learning, and it would be a huge stressful undertaking to start over again mid-year with a new model. I hear a lot of concern from the district office, administration, and parents about the need to do what is best for students, which I absolutely agree is the top priority. What is often missing from the sentiment is the fact that when teachers don't feel safe and supported, we are not able to be our best for our students. The idea of returning to campus in person makes the vast majority of us feel unsafe. I am not ready to take on the risk of hundreds of students each week. I am concerned that there is not adequate personal protective equipment, and we will certainly not see any federal funding to improve safety with the current administrations. We would be returning to school at the height of the flu season after the holidays when many students will have been in contact with extended family. The weather will be cold, yet we will have to keep doors and windows open to increase airflow. The fact is, not everyone can or will follow safety protocols, and teachers would assume a great deal more of the risk at school than any other staff member or administrator. I want to remind everyone that teachers are incredibly strong and resilient. We support and counsel our students in crisis. We buy them food and supplies with our own money. We consistently.
All right, and that is time, and so the line muted. And so if you have additional thoughts or you want to send the remainder of that letter over, please do. Either email it to the whole board or email it to me, and I can send it around. And our next and final speaker is Samin Schoenherr.
All right, I have Samin on the phone.
All right, hi Samin, you're on with the board and the public. You have 3 minutes, which will start when you do, and take it away.
All right, thank you. I'm here to talk about the mental health of teachers. Right now, it sucks. I have talked to countless numbers of teachers, some in my normal circle that I talk with, but many that I normally don't interact with on a regular basis. I don't know a single teacher that is not giving way more of their time than normal to try to make things work as best as we can for the students. Is it perfect? Of course not. But it's the best we can do. We're working 6 or 7 days a week. Personally, I'm working at least 10 to 11 hours a day for 6 days a week, and still a few more hours on that 7th day. No one is trying to assess the mental health of your frontline workers, and that concerns me. The question should not only be, do we feel safe returning to school? There should be questions asking if we have the mental bandwidth to handle switching to a hybrid situation on the fly. I don't. Personally, I have cried more this year than the previous 5 years combined. I'm going to lose it. My mood swings so drastically this year. Sometimes I feel okay, and other times I'm ready to give up. The survey that went out asking about our intentions for next year, if we are asked to go back in person, seems insensitive. There's more than just feeling safe. Honestly, I don't know if I feel safe going back, but that's not the issue for me. I know the extra work of trying to run a hybrid model makes me want to throw up, literally throw up. My husband is a saint. He's putting up with not seeing me much this year. I'm fortunate enough to have my own room to call an office, and that also means I'm usually in my office during my waking hours and not spending time with him. The few precious hours we get on the weekend are priceless, but that's all we get, and I'm not always in the best space to spend time with him. Thank God for the students. They're the only ones that seem to care. I hope all of my students know how much I love them. Most of them seem to understand what the teachers are going through. Honestly, the students are the only ones that have ever asked me how I feel and how teachers are feeling right now. I understand that decisions may be made that I don't like. And honestly, I'm thankful that I'm not in your shoes and I don't have to decide what next year is going to be like. But I wish I felt that you actually cared about the teachers as well as the students. I know the public expects you to care about the students, but for the love of God, please show you care. Actually care about the teachers too. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Samin.
I'm done.
Our final comment for the night, and so we are now in board workshop study session, the science of COVID-19 and the impacts on schools. Dr. Bravo, are you going to kick us off?
Yes. So we get a lot of questions around what the current county guidelines are. So I'm not we're not going to start so much with science as much as just the county guidelines. And we want to make you aware of what those current guidelines are. And we are going to actually put you through a little bit of the training that we would give people at sites around what to do under different kinds of scenarios. So, you know, the question of, well, what would be the proper response if someone was to have a COVID, if we were to be in person and someone was to have a COVID diagnosis or be a close contact to someone who has, et cetera. So Meredith has been the lead person in doing this training with administrators, and she's going to give you a version of that right now.
And Dr. Bravo, before we do that, can you talk about the, just like broader tonight, what are the goals? What are we deciding, if anything?
No decisions tonight. This is just for your, learning. And so Meredith is going to walk you through some activities so that you understand what the current directives are from public health. And then at some point between 7 and 7:30, Dr. Monica Roy will be on the line to speak with you and to answer any questions you might have. And again, no decisions, really just an opportunity to ask questions, either of us that we can answer from what we know of public health requirements or of Dr. Roy.
Great, thank you very much.
Good evening, trustees. I'm Meredith Hudson. I'm Chief of Strategy and Human Capital, but I'm also serving as the district designee to our county for COVID-related items. So I'm going to be with my designee hat on tonight, and I think I'm going to share a screen. Let's make sure I've got the ability to do that. And let me just make sure you all can see our COVID prepared guidance there on my screen. Yes.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. So as Dr. Bravo said, we'll do a few things tonight. I will, for you and for our community, sort of just spend a little bit of time in our protocols or our guidance document. And you'll see I'm using these materials rather than developing slides that are sort of translating these materials. I think it's really important to just go right to the primary source. So we're going to spend time in this. If you've studied it in depth, in and out yourself, I apologize if I'm repeating information that you already know, but this is our main primary driving document. And then we will transition, and as Dr. Bravo said, I will put you in the position, if you're okay with it, hopefully you'll come along on this ride with me, as if you were a site administrator, and mirror some of the trainings that we've been doing with our site administrators, working through the response to suspected and confirmed cases or close contacts. So I'm going to just start with the orientations. I think what was very helpful for us in sort of internalizing and operationalizing these protocols is, excuse me, I'm going to sort of flip through, is the structure of the county guidance. And so I'm going to start with just the table of contents here. And you can follow along if you wanted to on our county website, if you wanted your own version, or tell me when to sort of slow down and stop, or if you need me to zoom in. But I think that what is very important to me is that this document is organized around prevention. And every week on my COVID designee calls and in our trainings, the emphasis around prevention is consistent, that the most power we have is preventing and reducing risk within anybody on our campuses, in our district office and in our schools. But then that comes in a couple of different places. And then the preparation around monitoring, or the knowledge that we need to have around monitoring, and then our response. So responding to suspected and confirmed cases. So we're going to go through some of those components, and none of this will be information that you didn't already know to some degree, but again, sort of how we operationalize at the sites or in our offices. Another sort of organizing principle that I want to highlight is, again, our guidance, or our protocols. I call these protocols because it's more than just guidance, are organized around requirements, what is absolutely required in schools, what is recommended, and that those recommendations may come from sort of state guidance or CDC, and then additional considerations. And those are examples that we can implement, but are not requirements that the schools must follow. So again, that's just the high level structure of our protocols. And I think you all have seen this, and this is really what I think Dr. Roy will focus on tonight, are the guiding principles, the science and the evidence behind and the evolution of that evidence. So I'm not going to try to touch on that area of expertise, but I know that the primary guiding principle that is sort of builds these protocols is the science, and that it is updated regularly when that information changes. And again, it iterates, and they've tried to make it as practicable and adaptable as possible. So I'm going to start with the primary organizing principle, and I think you all know this, but as Dr. Bravo has shared with you all before, on the elementary side, the science supports building the organizing principle of stable cohorts, where students, the younger age students, are in a cohort together regularly, daily, where it is less feasible to limit that close contact and possibly for wearing a face covering. But our organizing principle, and again, this is the prevention of any spread and reduction of risk, is around physical distancing and face covering. So we know that, and you all have seen the slide that is sort of, that puts this into a concrete sort of perspective for us around what does physical distancing look like in a high school setting, where we take a classroom of typically 30-ish students and transition that to approximately 8 to 10. And again, the feasibility here around limiting close contact. I know that the fear is we can't control students in terms of outside of school. We can monitor, we can supervise, and that is definitely work that we are building around supervision at the school site. But there is definitely a fear or a concern around what are students doing outside of the school environment. So again, the physical distancing and face covering being that primary organizing principle that then drives the rest of this section. So again, this now I'll sort of just walk you through, and I won't read aloud, but again, it's just that sort of deeper orientation to the protocols. We move into the requirements and the recommendations and considerations for components within the distancing. So we've got some general recommendations, and this is a lot around signage, communication. We've shown some pictures, and you've seen some examples of that signage and path flows on campuses that we'd be working towards to, again, limit congregation or limit close contact. Again, some of those are examples of recommendations, but we've gone ahead and moved forward with many of those recommendations and some considerations. Again, the sort of detailed planning of arrival and departure is an expectation or a requirement. So again, no close contact for students and staff or families arriving, departing. We've talked about designated entry and exit gates. We touched on that with our visit to Orange County. But again, those are the requirements. And again, we're operationalizing all of those for whenever I think I'm looking at this for the long term. Whenever our students are returning to campus, we will be ready. I'm going to focus here for just a second on the classroom setting. I think we touched on this at a recent board meeting. And so I did just want to highlight again that in the middle schools and high schools, the expectation is spacing student desks apart. Oh, let's see, did we lose screen share? I'm going to just go back to that.
I believe it's just one trustee.
Okay, sorry, I'll just change it for everyone. Now, do you see my document back up again?
Yeah, we're back up.
Okay, great. So again, we touched on this a little bit last week, but I do just want to underscore that the requirement of spacing student desks, again, that's that driver for why we have, again, approximately 8 to 10 or 8 to 11 students in a classroom, or we'd be planning for that in that event. And then again, keeping class sizes as small as practicable. That's where that word comes in, but it's not, the desks must be 6 feet apart. I think an example of something beyond the requirement is the sorry, I'm just going to scroll a second, the additional shields and protections that we are also investing in, again, adding in those additional layers for our schools. I want to highlight, the non-classroom settings. This has come up a bit in questions that we've received. So staff break rooms, workspaces won't be allowed for gathering in those indoor spaces and offices. We work to have one staff person there. And we've done training so far, a recorded training for staff around the physical distancing and the face coverings. So that component has been provided to staff, and something that we'll continue to update on these sections of the protocols. I'm going to move a little just through transportation because we have a limited number of folks, but obviously distancing in transportation and food services is a requirement. Section B, the next part of the prevention section, is face coverings. Again, information that we know, but as a requirement. We know that all of our staff and our students would wear face covering at all times. Only those that are excluded would be those who have a condition that we discuss our medical conditions or have medical notes for. And again, for those who are not able to wear them, we need to ensure that they don't have close contact with students and staff, and hopefully have other options of face shield. I think this is maybe a good point to discuss. We've heard concerns around consistency of wearing face coverings, and it's something we really observed when we went to Orange County, and know that it is critical. And I think we would be sort of approaching, and anytime we have in-person students, approaching a non-negotiable that staff and students in particular would have those face coverings. That it's a part of being in any kind of in-person opportunity. All right, obviously the hand washing, hygiene, and other hygiene measures are important. So we'll continue to focus on that. I think this was an area of focus that we really looked at a lot in March, and taught and trained on hand washing, and we've probably gotten a little bit lax, but this is critical. I continue to hear over and over again from our medical professionals that distancing, face covering, and hand hygiene are the most important factors in schools. Again, if you'll notice that if we scroll down under a consideration, is consider installing those additional temporary hand washing stations, is an example that what we are committed to beyond just the requirements. Cleaning and maintenance is really all sort of driven by CDC. So we refer our staff and train our staff on the CDC guidelines. Just looked recently at some sort of quizzes or staff responses that were conducted at one site, just refreshing and checking for understanding to make sure that staff are able to accurately respond to questions based on the CDC cleaning and maintenance guidelines. And then we have our food services and events. I won't spend too much time there, but I think it's good to just sort of recap again the sort of additional safety measures that are requirements. Of course, limiting visitors, daily screening for students and staff. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Continuing to conduct all staff meetings, professional development via video or phone conference. So, and this is something we asked about in Orange County also, even in a school where they are in person or in a hybrid mode, all of those meetings are still conducted virtually, which we would commit to also. Even in a school where there we go. I think I heard a little echo. Apologies for that. Ensuring staff maintain the physical distance, adopting all of those procedures for distancing, and then training personal protective equipment for staff, and requiring students and staff to get tested after they develop symptoms. So we're going to spend more time, again, when we go through the sample training, we'll spend more time on testing and symptoms in just a minute. So I'm going to pause there for just a second, because I think really the bulk of our time now will be switching over to, again, this experiencing a training session. So I'll pause and just see questions or reactions to just the orientation of these protocols.
I guess if there's one of those sections that you think is makes it the most difficult the most difficult to pull off, or the most because of money, time, just figuring out how to do it? Like, where is that pain point?
Well, I'd invite Dr. Bravo to share, or anyone else too, but I think, I think obviously distancing is the primary challenge for bringing in-person opportunities, right? It changes everything. And as we shared with you all when we observed another site, their implementation was not grounded in 6 foot distancing at all times. And so that's a non-negotiable. So I think that 6 foot, both in the classroom walkways, it is the biggest barrier, the biggest logistical challenge, as some of our speakers said. I think through training and monitoring, many of the other components are behavior changes, but the physical distancing is the most expensive and the biggest hurdle.
Great, thank you.
Meredith?
Yes, ma'am.
You're more familiar with this document probably than I am. Is there anywhere in the document that they talk about prolonged exposure as a variable?
Well, we're going to touch on it in just a second. And I know that Dr. Roy will probably elaborate on that, both prolonged exposure and the impact of the barriers that the face covering can help with that prolonged exposure. But what we will tonight, I will touch on is, again, that definition of a close contact. So for someone to be defined as a close contact of an infected individual, they have to have been within 6 feet for at least 15 minutes over a period of time, so over a 24-hour period. So even those short durations of time, and even if wearing a face covering, that they can be considered a close contact. And again, I won't be able to speak to sort of the science and the evolving data, but I know for our part, it is really being able to implement and respond very quickly for any exposures for close contacts. Okay, with that, so again, that's our big framework, the county protocols as our driving operations. And now I'm going to move into a training. And so I'm going to put a couple caveats. Again, I hope that you all will bear with me. I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of activity and engagement. So again, come along this journey with me. I'll put you in the position of, if you were a site administrator, how you might respond to some scenarios. I'm just going to prepare you now. I'll ask you to engage. So again, this is a training that we've been doing this I have just completed at all of our sites now. And I start with, what's your current confidence level? So you don't have to say this out loud, but take just a second to jot down on a scale of 1 to 5, if you had to respond to a scenario in which an employee or a student is considered a close contact or test positive for COVID-19, what's your confidence level? 5 being very confident, 1 being not very confident. Take a second, jot it down. Okay, so keep that number. You don't have to say it out loud unless you absolutely want to, but my goal is to build knowledge, which builds confidence, and build muscle memory. That's what we've been talking about, is just the muscle memory around being able to respond quickly to scenarios. And again, to break that down a little further, that the knowledge includes, number 1, just knowing those responsibilities, especially the responsibilities at a school site, if we're talking about a school site, or at the district office, in responding to a suspected or a confirmed case. Identifying the action steps, and we're going to focus on what we call scenarios 1, 2, and 3 tonight. We won't have time for the 4th one, most likely. Scenario 1 is someone who is symptomatic, but we have no data. Scenario 2 is someone who is considered a close contact. And scenario 3 is a positive case. Then number 3, we want our folks to know who to contact if they have questions. And number 4, to be able to articulate the timelines that we operate under. And so we're going to start with the timelines, because that's really the whole reason why we need to be able to have very, very fast and efficient systems. So our timeline, our sort of driving force here is that if there is a positive case in our district, we are obligated to communicate that information to the county public health department within 4 hours of identifying that information. And when we have a positive case, it's not just information about the positive case, it is also information about their close contacts, so you can imagine there's a lot of research and a lot of data gathering in order to be able to do that. And then we of course have to communicate with close contacts, our labor partners, anyone else. There's a lot of communication, but that 4-hour timeline obviously requires procedures and efficiencies that we're building still and operationalizing, but are working towards that. All right, so now I've got another activity for you, and I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to just read this slide on your own, and then I'm going to ask someone to share with me the difference between isolation and quarantine. We're building some vocabulary and just some shared knowledge here, so you have 30 seconds to read this slide on your own. All right, who wants to just take a stab at what's the difference between isolation and quarantine?
I'll take a stab.
Thank you, Trustee Brown, go for it.
So both involve separating people who potentially are exposed to or have a contagious disease, but quarantine is more restrictive, where you're actually keeping them in a more restrictive space and monitoring and eliminating their ability to interact with anybody. That's my takeaway.
I appreciate that you start with the idea that they're both about separating people. And yes, that quarantine I think is restrictive in that it is actually that we use the word quarantine when we are talking about someone who has been exposed, and so that we're preventing any other spread, potential spread. Isolation is the word that we use when we're referring to someone who is ill, someone who is sick with a contagious disease, so that that person does not get anybody else sick. So it's just an example of we're being very, very specific with our vocabulary and our language, and we're doing lots of practice with our scenarios so that we can be very, very clear. And the clearer we are, the more that we're using our checklist, the less that we have to sort of make decisions because a lot of our guidance is already there. So isolate is for those who are already ill, and quarantine is for those who are exposed to the disease to make sure that they don't spread disease.
Meredith?
Yes, ma'am.
Am I wrong in assuming that neither one of those is enforceable?
Well, for us, for our staff and our students, it is, yes. And we'll go through that in terms of when someone has been in an isolation period or a quarantine period, when they are allowed to return, and the information we need in order for that to happen.
Well, we can enforce it in terms of our campus, but we can't enforce it off campus.
Great point. Yep, I had an administrator ask that again recently. What happens when I see a student walking on the street who is supposed to be in quarantine? That's right. We're not policing their homes, but we can enforce them for returning to work or the work site. And then a cohort. Anybody want to describe a cohort for us?
I can do that.
Thanks.
It's basically a bubble of people that stay together. They just are a bubble and they stay together, and they are a pod, and they all just stay together and don't mix with us.
Yep, there you go. And we talked about that. That's more frequent or more recommended at the elementary level. And at the high school level, we see this more just with our sort of athletic conditioning groups or groups who are coming to participate in an activity. They're in that a cohort. They're not there all together all day, but they're more in a cohort. All right, so now we're going to go into a full slide on just the definition of a close contact. And again, I'll give you 30 seconds to read this, and then we're going to highlight some of the key ideas of a close contact. Okay, who wants to share some of the key components of the definition of a close contact?
I can try. So there's a window, and the window does not, or it starts 48 hours before your positive test. And then you're really trying to determine, are there any humans who have been within 6 feet of this person for 15 minutes or more? It doesn't have to be continuous. It doesn't matter if they're wearing a mask or in a bubble. It's just they were within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more within 24 hours.
You got it. You got all my things here. So if I have tested positive, then I am going to need to identify any of those people who have been within 6 feet for at least 15 minutes. And again, that can be repeated short duration interactions for the 2 days before my symptoms or my positive test. And it doesn't matter if we've had that face covering. Those are critical. So it doesn't mean don't wear the face covering, but for caution and for reducing risk, we identify close contacts, even with face coverings. You got it. So that's our foundation. We've just built some knowledge, built some shared vocabulary, and now we're going to I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the model. Again, this is all around responding to suspected and confirmed cases. So this is a lot of words to just sort of highlight what do we do at the school level versus what does the public health department do? What are we responsible for in schools for students or staff? And we basically are responsible for notifying the county. We are responsible for identifying close contacts in the school setting. The county department health will identify those close contacts in personal life. So if I found out about a positive case on a Tuesday, we're looking back Monday, and then anyone else that they've had contact with over the weekend, we're not doing that contact tracing. And again, then we communicate consistently back and forth with the county around monitoring those return dates, quarantine, and isolation periods. And we do that through a designee structure. And this is somewhat new, that we've been building our trainings through this designee structure.
Can I hop in really quick?
Yeah.
It looks like Dr. Roy has joined. Should I let them in?
Perfect. I actually, yes. And I think, Bob, we can, if we can, this is a perfect pause point. I think if we want to pause, and then we'll have the science and then pick back up on our response. Does that sound all right, Dr. Bravo?
Dr. Bravo, I believe you're muted if you're talking.
Yes, that's just fine.
We're going to pause there. I'll stop screen sharing, and Dr. Roy will give you much more of the background behind the guidance, and then we'll practice. So get ready for scenarios when after she's done.
Okay. So I'll let her in now. And do you want to welcome her to the meeting?
I'll let Dr. Bravo do that.
Great. Perfect.
We don't hear you, Dr. Bravo.
There's one in every bunch, huh? That keeps on forgetting to unmute. Good evening, Dr. Roy. If you're ready for us, we're ready for you.
Great. Well, hello, everyone, and good evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'll just introduce myself briefly. Dr. Monica Roy, I'm one of the assistant health officers in Santa Clara County and the communicable disease controller for the county, and have been heavily involved with the school guidance and providing training and support for our early childhood education, our K through 12, as well as our higher education sectors. I'm here today. I know that this pandemic has obviously posed unprecedented challenges and immense amounts of pressure on school boards and districts to make very complex decisions. And I'm hopeful today that I can help answer some questions that you may have, particularly around some of the science that pertains to some of the decisions that you have to make, as well as highlight some of the key aspects of our K through 12 guidance. And I understand that there's, Dr. Bravo, some questions that the board had. Would you like me to go ahead and kind of start and address some of those, or would you like to take questions, live questions now?
Well, perhaps you could take the questions that I sent ahead of time and choose just maybe like your favorite 4 or 5, and then open it up to real time.
Okay. One thing that I will do as a starting point is just highlight one of the organizing principles around our guidance, because I think it actually addresses several of the questions that were asked. So in our guidance, there's a double-headed arrow figure that shows essentially that on the younger age scale, on our elementary school age children, that we recognize that some of the public health interventions are going to be more difficult to implement, things like keeping young children distanced, keeping face coverings on the entire time. However, they have a greater ability to remain in a stable cohort. And so that is one of the most important interventions in our younger students. Now, for all of you, we're obviously focusing on the other end of the spectrum, which is our high school students. And in that group, we had anticipated that it's going to be much more difficult to maintain stable cohorts, and due to social and behavioral patterns of teens, difficult to limit exactly who they come into contact with. But for those reasons, distancing and face covering become that much more important in terms of public health interventions to decrease risk. So I just wanted to start out with that. And I saw that there was questions in kind of 4 key areas. The first one was really about general risk reduction and about what are the most effective ways we can stop the spread of the virus and who's most at risk in our community. So at this point, masking, distancing, and trying to move as many of our activities either outdoors or when they're indoors, trying to ensure that they are well ventilated. Those are, I think I would say, the pillars of what we can do now in all of the settings, not just in schools, but throughout the community. And in terms of who's at greatest risk, generally it's our older individuals, over 65, individuals with underlying health conditions, including heart and lung disease, and of course, those who are much more severely immunosuppressed. We also know that infants less than 1 have some more severe outcomes. There was a second set of questions that were around risk reduction and distancing. And one of them that I think would be worth to kind of comment on, it says if a classroom has good ventilation and a MERV 13 filter, is additional air filtration or purification required or recommended? And so here I would just highlight, really there's 2 things that we're always focused on. One is ventilation, the other is filtration. And there's 3 kind of mechanisms that can occur. The first is to use natural ventilation, opening doors and windows, utilizing fans near open doors and windows to improve outdoor air exchange. The second is to maximize and improve our HVAC systems, both for ventilation and filtration. So setting those HVAC systems to settings where they're maximizing the amount of air that's coming from the outdoors, increasing the settings so that there's maximum airflow for as long as possible. And then also filtration. And so that was the question of the MERV 13, and that is absolutely a recommendation. To maximize filtration with at least a MERV 13 filter. And then the third pillar that we've talked about, or not pillar, but third method that can be used to improve filtration, and this is particularly for schools that maybe have inoperable windows and maybe cannot, for various reasons, upgrade their HVAC, is to consider more portable, smaller room air filters with HEPA filters. That's definitely, we would say, kind of a step down from what this question indicates, which is really we would prefer people to upgrade their HVAC and to do things like opening their windows to maximize outdoor air. It's mostly if you cannot do either of the first 2 that you might consider using these portable air filters in the rooms. There was a third area of questions around kind of case management and what happens, how many cases can we expect, and who's going to do the contact tracing. So particularly, of course, with an emphasis and concern about returning high school students. So we you know, if, for example, your district was going to be opening in January, we cannot say the exact number of positive cases that we should expect. There are various calculators that you can find online, but one of the biggest factors that is unknown, particularly for the, you know, anticipating for any period of time in the future, is it really is very much dependent on what's going on in the community at that time, and what the community rates are would very much affect the likely number of positive cases we would expect to see. And the second part of that question is, what cases of these cases, what proportion can we expect to be severe enough to require hospitalization? So here's some very good news, is that kids are very unlikely to have a serious illness requiring hospitalization. Most children are asymptomatic, or when they have symptoms, have fewer symptoms or less severe symptoms. So that is good news. And then kind of the last question in this area about when we have a positive case, who does the contact tracing. So really it's a joint effort between the school and the public health department. So we are relying on the school to do the first step of making sure that the case is at home and isolated, and that all the close contacts have been identified and also sent home to quarantine. Our public health department is there to help walk you through that, to support you. And then our case contact tracers actually do in-depth interviews and with all cases and all close contacts, and provide supportive resources. And they do monitoring calls during the isolation and quarantine period to check on the individuals, make sure that they're doing okay. So without the school's involvement, we lose the opportunity to have a very quick and rapid response of getting people home and safely isolated, because by the time the public health department learns about it, several days may have gone by, because we have to wait until the lab comes in through our system. And so the school is our first opportunity to make sure people are safely home. And then the last area, there were several questions around school reopening. One of them was specifically about any quantifiable risk assessment in high school age students who are returning to in-person learning. So the short answer is there's no, very clearly quantifiable risk assessment. And I will take a moment, I think, because this is an area that many people have had questions about, which is, what is the risk, particularly of child to adult, adult to adult, adult to child transmission. And what I'll say is the evidence is kind of broken into kind of three big groups. The first evidence that we have of what's going on in schools occurred back in March and April, before schools even, many schools had closed down. And from those studies, they all pretty much consistently showed that there was very little risk of, children propagating outbreaks and for large amounts of child to child or child to adult transmission. And then in the summer, there were a handful of countries that had either remained open, like Sweden and Singapore, or others that had reopened on the earlier side. And all of those data were quite reassuring as well. About, very limited evidence of outbreaks and school-based transmission. And then there's kind of a third area of what happened when schools in late August, early fall started reopening all over the world. And there I would say, again, for the most part, still showing that child to child and child to adult transmission was less common than staff to staff transmission. And this was seen in big studies in England and Australia. The one, or rather I should say two exceptions to this, and this is very relevant for high schools, is in France and Israel, there were some very well-publicized outbreaks in high schools in both countries. In particular in Israel, when they've, kind of the data was actually published, there was a lot of commentary on the large class sizes, crowding, and there was no mask wearing. It was in the middle of a heat wave, and all the children were allowed to take off their masks. And so I would say that in general, returning to the question at hand, which is quantifiable risk assessment, even though we have some of these data from all these other countries and these experiences, it's really hard to predict what's going to happen here, because I would say there's two important elements that affect the risk. One is, as I mentioned before, the level of community-based transmission. So how much COVID is in the surrounding community. And then the second is the school's efforts, mitigation efforts. So what risk reduction efforts are there in terms of masking, distancing, and other efforts, including ventilation and things that I mentioned earlier. So let me pause there. I know I've shared a lot of information and have been talking relatively quickly. So let me pause and see what other questions I can answer.
All right, trustees, any questions? Or Dr. Bravo, I see you came off mute.
Sure, I'm going to ask a question just to let's show everybody that it's okay. Dr. Roy is with the superintendents once a week, and she's great. She's great to ask a question. She doesn't hurt nobody.
And I'm here to answer questions. So
Dr. Roy, my question that I was thinking about was, one of the things that I've heard of concern for students is that while they might be asymptomatic or have relatively mild cases, that we should beware because the long-term consequences of having COVID are not known. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I think that is true. I think that even though the individuals right now that we're seeing are having long-term effects, or that there's suspicion for long-term effects, I think are occurring more in individuals who were symptomatic. So there's examples of individuals who maybe had some neurologic symptoms and then continue to feel kind of this brain fog, or individuals that did have respiratory difficulty or effect on their heart that are continuing to see that. But just like with everything else with this outbreak, the story continues to unfold. And that's why it's important for us to do everything we can to reduce risk transmission, not just in schools, but everywhere in our community. And I'll take this moment to also say we focus a lot on schools, but one of the things that's going to affect safe reopening of schools is also the activities that we partake in ourselves, our teachers, our students, our parents, administrators, what we do out in the community, because those risks that when we have gatherings or go to a gathering, or if we go do indoor dining, those are things that are going to increase the risk and bringing that increased risk back to the school.
Dr. Roy, is there any data on which population age groups are more likely to engage in risk-taking behavior in society at large? And when you talk about children, for our purposes, I think the only group that we really are concerned about is teenagers. So,
yes. Yeah. And so I'm not aware off the top of my head of specific quantitative data. I think that that's a very good point. I've kind of perused or glanced over some studies that have focused behavior, but would not be able to comment more specifically on exactly which age groups. I certainly would say that I very much think that young adults, teens, as well as 18 to 25-year-olds, very much given what we see in universities and colleges and a lot of large gatherings happening there, certainly know that there's concern for risk-taking behavior. But I would say that we're in an effort, as many counties are, in trying to determine where is our transmission risk coming from. Is it from our church gatherings? Is it from our indoor dining? Is it from families deciding to have other families over? It's not an easy question to answer. We're trying at this moment to answer that question. And I think that might help us understand a little bit better which age groups are kind of engaging in risky behavior. I have a feeling probably all age groups are doing things risky on some level.
I have a couple questions. One is, we're hearing a lot from parents, particularly of our teenagers, about the impacts of isolation on mental health. And I'm wondering if you could give some thoughts on just the benefits of being in school versus being at home, because I think that that's a big question that I'm considering in terms of what's best for students, because there's pros and cons either way.
Absolutely. I think so much is focused on the risk of, having cases when returning students back to school. And I think that very much needs to be balanced with the harms that are also occurring right now, because students are isolated, they are at home. There are so many well-documented kind of health effects of this prolonged isolation. And I think it's seen in great magnitude in teens who, just biologically for so many reasons at that age, need to be with others. And it's really hard for them to be isolated at home. So I thank you for bringing that kind of question because I think more in this discussion about school reopening, definitely it needs to be balanced with that consideration always.
And then just a couple quick ones. One, in the guidance, it says that taking temperatures is not required because it could lead to congregation. But if there a way to make it so that there was not congregation, would it be the recommendation to take temperatures upon entry to school sites?
That's a good question. Our recommendation to not, specifically require temperature screening, you mentioned one, which is that it might actually inadvertently, lead to congregation. But I would say even apart from that, we know that fever is only one of the symptoms. Many people are symptom screen positive, don't have a fever. It often gives people kind of a false sense of assurance. Hey, I've checked the temperature, they're good to go. There's no way that they're infected with COVID. And that's simply not true. And in fact, our symptom screen is not 100% because as we've been talking about, many students are going to be asymptomatic as well. We feel like there's so many other things that the school is being, going to have to do in terms of risk mitigation. And this is a rather complex endeavor, even beyond the congregation, just having every day to do that and record it. And that if there's not a benefit, and what we compared and we looked at data during H1N1 when they started doing mass temperature screenings, and in some of these studies they basically showed that you screen lots and lots of people, you find very few positives, and the effectiveness or how well temperature screening as an intervention really works it's not a very effective intervention. And so that's why our recommendation is what it is.
Okay, last one and then I'll stop. So in terms of if we're thinking about special education in particular, for one-on-ones, for, I'm a teacher myself. And so the, our RSP teacher would come in and push in, and there's the 250 square foot guidance right now. If we're thinking about even bringing back some programs like special ed, how, I guess, can you comment on, how do we support students who need the one-on-one, but then we still need the distance?
Yeah, I think that that is a very good question, and one that we've given some thought to because there are so many challenges, whether you're talking about from, the shuttle bus that brings some of your higher needs students and how you're going to distance them on the bus, to especially those with kind of actual needs with assistance with ADLs or activities of daily living, and you're definitely going to be less than 6 feet. And I would say this is the area that we do specify in the K through 12 guidance. If aides or teachers and instructors are going to have close contact, that this is the group that we would really require masking, eye protection, and then whatever personal protective equipment they would be using if they were going to come in contact with any body fluids, just as they would before COVID. And so we really are almost thinking of them in a different way because we know that close contact is going to happen. And that's why also masking is going to be even more important.
Thank you.
Dr. Roy, thank you for joining us. Teachers have expressed the concerns about us getting enough PPE, about not having federal funds, about their risk factors. And then we did say, we should limit ours to 9 through 12, but really they've got young students as well that are either starting to return to school or starting a hybrid model or about to. What are some things that you want to point out related to PPE and teachers?
And teachers. So yeah, one of the other things in our guidance, we actually called out and created in our revised version, a whole section that really highlights the importance and kind of the different risk reduction measures specifically for teachers. Much of it is actually part of the rest of the guidance. And this is a particularly important question because, you know, we do still remain concerned that actually staff are most likely to transmit to other staff. We see that in other workplaces, and schools have been not been different, and that's been our experience here in the county as well. So that's why kind of focusing on making sure that teachers are not taking their meals together in a break room where their masks are down and they're talking and they're in close quarters. That's something that, you know, in terms of protection is very important. Also making sure and really emphasizing in our guidance the importance of distancing from all other staff, from other adults, and in the high school setting, the teens. We understand that's not always possible in the younger kids. And again, that's why cohorting is the more important intervention, but with our teens, making sure that they're distancing from their students as well. So I think that's what a large part of our guidance really is focused on in terms of protection for teachers. I understand that the state has provided schools with masks, and you know, we're very lucky that that right now that there are studies that show even cloth masks. Not only kind of the new scientific data is that not only are they reducing risk to others, it actually now CDC has updated their guidance or their webpage to say that yes, that actually there's some protection conferred upon you as well. There's also some hypotheses that if you do get COVID, you're less likely to get severe COVID because that mask is preventing as much of a high viral load in the infected person. So those are all things that are very reassuring about how teachers can protect themselves and how useful masks are to prevent transmission.
Dr. Roy, you touched on two things I'd like to know more about. The asymptomatic person in your midst, regardless of the age of that person. So if you have somebody who becomes symptomatic or tests positive, you don't know that that didn't come from an asymptomatic sort of typhoid Mary person in your midst who could go on for a considerable period of time being a source of infection. Is that correct?
Well, that's why we have our case and contact tracing approach that we have, right? So that anybody who has been in close contact with the individual would be isolating as well. But I think what you're referring to is even more what we're also embarking on now, which is retrospective contact tracing. So not just looking forward as to, who you might have exposed, but who you might have been exposed by. And we're trying to kind of gather more data and more approaches looking back at kind of that scenario you're talking about.
And then the other thing that you touched on, you mentioned face shields and the eye. I've wondered for some time why we don't hear a whole lot more about the eye as a site of infection. I did a little looking into it. I came across this statement. If someone coughs and fine aerosol droplets get in your eyes, you're going to get the infection. That was Dr. Daniel McQuillan, VP of the Infectious Disease Society of America. Shields or masks, or both?
That's a very good question. So we definitely know masks work. We know that face shields are important in healthcare worker settings. It has not been well studied anywhere else. But we felt that it was reasonable for teachers who wanted more protection to consider using face shields, which is why in our K through 12 guidance, we actually specify that those who want to wear a mask and a face shield, that's totally acceptable. The only point being that the face shield would not be in replacement, because the way that the face shield's, the bottom of the face shield, it's completely open on the bottom. So it would not prevent spread of droplets or aerosols to another individual. So we would want people to wear a mask and a face shield if they wanted to do so.
And my very last thing, I promise, privacy laws. How will we communicate with our families if a student or teacher tests positive? Because the students who've been in the closest proximity have to be determined some way. They're going to have to be asked to quarantine. What is someone who is asked to quarantine? I mean, I don't know how we're going to make
Yeah.
this.
How does this work? Yes.
Because we're going to be trying to figure out, well, who was around the person who's not in their seat right at the moment.
Right.
So
So
how are we maintaining privacy for that individual?
that is an excellent question. So as I mentioned before, the case and contact work is really a partnership between the school and the public health department. We anticipate that the school is helping to identify school-based contacts, and the case and contact investigators are not only investigating anybody outside of the school, so household members, people maybe they went and hung out with, but they're also going to identify maybe anybody else they might have socialized with on campus that the school may not know about. What we expect schools to do is really just focus on your attendance rosters. And as you might recall from our K through 12 guidance, we recommend having assigned seating so that you are able, without having to consult the individual, just consult the teacher and, you know, the seating charts, identify who at least is in the classroom, who's been seated around them. And of course, if the individual, you know, additionally identifies and says, oh, yes, I spent a lot of time with so-and-so, and, you know, he was in, you know, during my break, and he's not even in any of my classes, we certainly would want you to pass that information on when you report the case. But the idea is that you're using, you know, assigned seating and your existing records to identify those close contacts, and our case and contact tracers are going to do that extra step beyond that.
You mean your contact tracers are the ones who are going to notify the other families of kids who might have been exposed?
Yeah, so the idea would be that, again, the first pass is figuring out who is sitting. What we're most concerned about is people who are meet the close contact definition, less than 6 feet, more than 15 minutes. And if there's anybody, you know, in the classroom settings that, you know, that the teacher can identify or that the student themselves can identify, that's who, you know, we would want you to report. If the student additionally shares more information, you know, and says these, you know, these additional students on campus were my close contacts, then we would do the same thing. What would happen after that is our case contact tracer will call the case. They're going to go through all that information again, and they're going to identify anybody else. And yes, they will call any of those close contacts, including their families. When it's a minor, our team has, you know, kind of a specific approach depending on their age of how to engage the parent as well as the student.
All right, I'm going to jump in really quick because I know Dr. Roy's time is very valuable, and it may be running out of it, right? Because I think we have 30 minutes. Is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, to be off.
So, trustees have already asked a question. Thank you. I think there's a couple who haven't, maybe our student board members. So Stacey, I see you came off mute. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted some clarifying questions, Dr. Roy. When it comes to the masks, I've heard recently that the surgical masks with the different layers of filtration are preferred to the cloth masks. Is that accurate?
You know, I'm not aware of specific scientific studies. When I had looked specifically on this topic, it was much earlier in the epidemic, and there really wasn't really great evidence on exactly how effective cloth masks versus surgical masks are. What I will say, though, is our surgical masks, you know, because of the concern for huge healthcare surges, have historically been preserved for, you know, our acute healthcare workers and responders. But that's something I'd have to get back to you on.
Okay. And then you talked about community transmission being kind of we need to understand the community transmission to really understand the risk of being able of transmitting it in our reopened schools. Santa Clara County is a pretty big place. And while it's troubling to see the uptick in cases recently, all of that could be happening on the other side of the county. It could be happening more on the east side or in the South County, which has kind of been the trends. So in considering that risk, should we be looking specifically at like our zip codes where our schools are, or should we be looking at Santa Clara County in general?
Yeah, that is a great question, and one that comes up a lot. So I actually would, at this time, really recommend looking at the county level. We have made zip code level data available for those of you who are interested. The superintendents are aware we've shared that. It's a dashboard now on our website. However, I will caution there's several limitations when you start looking at things at a very local level. One of them is that, as you know, as I've highlighted, it's the risk in the school community is also just as much as we are concerned about our kids, also coming from our teachers, and our teachers may not actually be living in that zip code. The other thing that I'll say is every time we take a smaller and smaller chunk of the area, we get less confident in the precision of the number, because we're talking about once you start getting to a number of cases per 100,000 and in your zip code, there may be, 30,000 people, that precision of that number becomes less. So kind of hanging your hat on all of that becomes, I think, a little bit more difficult. And there's all kinds of caveats of, like populations that may be increasing or decreasing numbers that aren't actually going to affect your school. So all that to say, I do think that looking at the county level makes sense. I think schools that are in, areas that are not, or zip codes that are not kind of the hot zones or the very dark zones on our maps, I would say you can probably feel a little bit better, and that's okay. And if you're in an area that's a hot zone, I would say that's not necessarily an indication to not consider opening, but rather that, we would want to consider things like increased testing and really taking things slow as you open in a real phased approach.
Okay.
Dr. Roy, there was one question that we didn't finish, was the availability of PPE. That was one of the concerns that came up and we didn't answer that.
Yeah,
maybe we don't know.
Well, no. So from my perspective, my understanding was that the state had provided all schools with PPE, and I think probably the Office of Ed could maybe comment and provide us a little bit more clarity on whether that was not felt to be a sufficient supply. From my understanding, that it was there another kind of question or concern about?
Teachers brought up we would be able to meet what we needed if we go back or if we're in a hybrid model, and just what's the availability look like going down the road?
Yeah, I mean, the face masks can be washed and reused. So there shouldn't be, I would think, an issue of there being enough masks or enough PPE for teachers.
Thanks, Dr. Roy.
And Trustee Vera, we will supply you, with exactly what the inventory is, before we ask you to make any decision.
Okay. Just two other really quick clarifying questions. So regarding the reporting, we're reporting cases to you. We're partnering on contract casing, and the county is really the one that's reporting out cases. Is there, let's talk about the transparency to our community about being able to report where there's been positive cases on school sites and things like that. I think Palo Alto Unified was maybe the first to kind of put their dashboard public. Is that something that's part of the reopening guidelines? How do we handle that?
Yeah, it is definitely not a specific recommendations of ours that districts put up dashboards. We, just like you, it's interesting, we share the same responsibility that districts and the public health department really do have to be transparent, either when you know about cases or, of course, when we get reported cases on the county level. And so transparency is very important. I think that it also needs to be balanced, I think, by the realization that there may be kind of a lot of opportunity to misconstrue or like not really understand the context in which those cases occurred. One of the things that you may know about is that we will soon be releasing a directive, which one of the requirements for schools will be to submit the number of students and staff they have on campus. And one of the reasons that we want to do that is so that people can actually make sense when we share case data, that it's not just, hey, there's 6 cases, because 6 cases amongst 20 students is a whole heck of a lot. 6 cases amongst 20,000 is really good. So knowing that denominator is really important. And so I would say the same thing for any district that might be considering putting up any kind of data dashboard, is to consider that denominator, and also to consider the focus. We know that schools are going to have cases. What we want to prevent is school-based transmission. We want to prevent that one case from becoming 4, 5, 10 cases. And so really focusing on that and how often or how not often, hopefully, that is happening, I think is an important and message to share with the public in your community.
Great. And this last one, I promise. I think my biggest concern from a risk perspective with high school populations has been passing periods and unstructured time, and being able to maintain that 6 feet distance and maintain mask wearing and things like that. So any thoughts on, is there an increased risk during those times? I'm kind of thinking now that passing periods are usually less than 15 minutes, so maybe that helps minimize that unstructured time that we would be on campus together.
Yeah, great question. I think with regards to that, one is, as much as possible, if people can be using, if there's multiple passageways, if there's outdoor passageways, kind of maximizing that so you have decreased density. The other strategy is to ensure kind of have one-way direction so that actually, on the right side, everyone's going in one direction, the left side, everyone's going in the other. That is also a strategy that, same thing with stairwells, kind of making it so that one is, specified for a certain direction. And then trying to do everything you can to limit loitering. That's one of the reasons why loitering is probably not the too strong of an adjective, but hey, it's kind of hanging out in the hallway and staying there. That's why we recommend in our guidance to minimize the use of lockers or not use lockers, because we know kids are going to congregate around them. But instead encouraging them, hey, you obviously have to go from one class to another, but do that as quickly as possible rather than sitting there hanging out talking to your friend.
Thank you.
No problem.
I know we're a little bit over. Can I ask you 2 really quick questions? Do you have time for that?
Yes, and then I'm going to have to get off.
Okay, great. So the first one is, let's ignore kids for a second. Let's take them out of the equation and focus on adults. Right now, I can go rent a movie theater and bring 19 of my friends to it. Are there any age groups or people that you would, even though you would not recommend do that?
So I would say it's not even any specific age group. Right now, even though you can go to certain indoor venues, that doesn't mean that people should do it, that they're, that I would say that it's kind of the safer option, because it's not. And one of the questions we commonly get is, about kind of theaters versus schools. And one thing that I will say is that, we think schools can be safer than theaters, because in a theater, if you can imagine it, there's going to be potentially many more individuals, not just, kind of a classroom size of individuals. Those people don't know each other. We would never be able to do contact tracing. And there's probably far less motivation and ability to have strict mitigation measures the way that the schools are able to. And so that's what I would say on that.
Okay. And then thank you. And then second question, when Dr. Fauci was here, he talked about, I think he was bragging about Santa Clara County and how well prepared we are for rolling out vaccines if we get to that point. I don't know if this is your area of expertise, but what is the current thought around, if a vaccine comes out and it's ready, what does distribution to schools look like?
Yes. So this is a whole topic in and of itself. So I'll just, kind of be very brief and say that the county is currently incorporating state and national kind of framework and guidance. The first step is prioritizing who is going to get the vaccine in various phases. So in the very first phase, when there's only limited amount of vaccine, it's going to be going to our healthcare workers, and not even all our healthcare workers, the ones that are at highest risk, the ones that are doing aerosol generating procedures or emergency room doctors, things like that. And then there's going to be subsequent phases, and eventually it'll be the entire community, including, our students and our children, et cetera, later on. And so we are setting up a lot of task forces, some with our healthcare providers, those who are going to be vaccinating, our large healthcare systems that will actually be providing the vaccines, as well as community stakeholders as well. We know that there is a lot of kind of misapprehension, question, concern, fear, unknown about the COVID vaccine. And so really feel that it's important to directly engage our community as this COVID vaccine is rolled out.
Great. And thank you for going over. I know for this board, it's been really important to really be directed by science, and having the opportunity to have you come has been great because we know the work you're doing on a daily basis to work with our staff. So thank you for that. And
you're quite welcome.
It
was my pleasure.
Words, or Dr. Bravo, if you have anything, Meredith?
I just want to say thanks and let her go because I said 30 minutes and we got more.
I very much enjoyed being here with all of you, and hope that I was able to help answer some questions. And with that, I will say good evening.
All right. Have a great night. All right. So Meredith,
Meredith's back.
Jump back in. Do y'all need a break?
That's what I was going to ask. I'm ready to jump back in if you want. We can also take a little transition if you need.
2 minutes? Okay, let's do a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 7:43. All right, that's 5 minutes. So if y'all around the computers want to come back on video. All right, just waiting on a couple people and then we'll get started. If you're back, get those cameras going. All right, it's 7:45. Let's get back to it.
Okay, now that we've you all have had the opportunity to hear from Dr. Roy, we'll hopefully build on some of that or actually go a little deeper. So again, want to make sure you can see my slide now with the key personnel up on the screen. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we had built some foundation originally, built some vocabulary that we then used a little bit more with Dr. Roy's presentation. And so now I just want to sort of go a little deeper into this designee model. So I serve as the district's designee. I know Dr. Bravo really wanted it to be him, and they said no, he had to identify someone else. And we, in that role, I ensure that we report all of those cases and that we have the systems in place to implement all of the steps that you'll see in just a little bit. Though I will note that we have a team here that is our 2 district nurses and Rich Alpaz in Human Resources, who then focuses on coordinating those staff absences for isolation and quarantine. So we call ourselves the district COVID response team, and then our sites have site COVID response teams, primarily currently right now, principal, assistant principals, activities, athletic directors, health clerk, and there are some roles for the attendance clerk too. So, and the model here is that the idea that from the county requesting this single point of contact as the designee, so that we have a single point of contact from the district communicating with the public health department, reporting those positive cases, but also working with the schools in terms of the implementation of those steps and communication. So I know Trustee Brown, I think you had asked a little bit ago about the communication. So we work with the schools to communicate our sort of core template letters to close contacts or impacted individuals, and then can communicate with the superintendent so that you all can be updated. And I think this is a pretty recent development and comes out of the issue of, maybe one positive case, but yet the public health department was contacted 3 times regarding a single case. And so then work is duplicated and definitely lacking efficiency. So this is, the system is being defined and refined, and we have weekly COVID-19 designee trainings and meetings with Dr. Roy luckily, and folks from the Emergency Operations Center and the DOC to be able to then communicate and train those teams at the sites and departments. So that's the structure. And any questions on just the structure and that process before we start going into the scenarios?
I have one question. You said we have 2 district nurses. Is that enough
Great question.
to support this model?
We have health clerks at every site, and then 2 registered nurses. I believe they're both RNs. That's a good question. I think as of right now, yes, it's something we're monitoring. Though we are definitely looking at what are the systems and operations, and that may need to change. We'll see. I forgot to mention too, before I started, I meant to sort of give you a quick little landscape of what's ahead. This is about 30 minutes left of this training. So I think that we should finish, in about 30 minutes. And then hopefully that gives you some time at the end to just debrief, synthesize, and as you finish your workshop. Okay, we will spend the next 30 minutes really going into scenarios 1, 2, and 3. And again, I'll ask you to participate just like I would those COVID response teams at the sites. And I start here mostly just to say this is a little bit overwhelming right now, but these are the decision trees for many of the scenarios. We're going to come back to these, but it is a very helpful place to start. So our sites now have had training on all of this, have these materials, hard copy. I said post them up, and then again, we're getting more and more tools from our county folks, including more training and tools for people like our attendance clerks, which I'll touch on in a second. So we'll move from the decision tree into scenario 1. So we're going to start with scenario 1, where there is someone who is a positive symptom screen. We have a daily health screen for staff right now who are on campus and for anyone who's on campus. But we don't always get information through that screen. That may be one avenue, but this is anybody who is symptomatic. We'll often just get a phone call or about someone who might be symptomatic. And it'll take me just a sec. I'm going to zoom in because we'll work through this flow chart. And what I'll have you do for each of those scenarios, we'll have a little bit of a similar format. We will focus in on the green box of the site or the department administrator, again, putting you in that with that hat of a site administrator. So we're going to go into scenario 1, where we have a student or a staff member who exhibits one or more of the symptoms, either in our health screen or we just find out about it. So I'm going to give you a minute to look at the green box. What are the steps that a site or a department administrator do? Feel free to just highlight what you see, call it out.
Isolate.
Yep, we're talking about a symptomatic person here, so we use that word isolate. You'll see it with even if it's not symptomatic later, but yep, we isolate. So let's, especially if that's a student is coming in with symptoms, we'll isolate them on campus in an isolation area and while waiting to send them home. If it's a staff member, send them home immediately. You got it.
Yeah, I think we need to elaborate on send them home. If they're sick, how are they supposed to get there? Walk, wait for the parent to get off work and pick them up?
Yes.
Put them in an isolated spot in an office until somebody can collect them? Define send them home.
Yes.
I think it's supposed to be very high level, like, hey, here's what does them. There's probably sub protocols beneath these.
Yeah, I get that, but the one thing that we never seem to be able to get to talk about, and December 1 is bearing down on us like a freight train, are details. And there's a lot of this stuff that it looks very nice in a sentence, but then when you come to living it out, you better be ready for the details.
So just to elaborate a little bit, because we'll see this bullet on every, I'm going to give it away. You'll see this bullet on every scenario. So again, our nurses are working with the sites to identify isolation areas. Right now, we have very few students on campus, and so we have an isolation location identified. Outside is best, just as Dr. Roy said, access to facilities, et cetera. So our nurses are working with sites. And then again, yes, it's typically call them home. So any procedures that we would normally do with a student who is ill, call the parent so that the parent can retrieve them. But again, if it's a student, that they're isolated. For a staff member, they should go home immediately. Our goal is, again, preventing any risk, or reducing risk. So the staff member should leave immediately. We then have isolation instructions, and I'm going to show you these in just a second as these samples or these tools. Isolation instructions for staff and students. The site notifies me or one of our COVID designee response teams. So it's those two nurses, myself or Rich, so that they have somebody to get in touch with immediately. And then the site administrator is responsible for ensuring that those cleaning protocols are taken care of immediately. And then I'm not going to spend too much time on the forms and letters because you'll see this bullet here for all the scenarios too, but we have a whole slew of communications from our county office, these templates developed by the county office for multiple scenarios. So if we need a communication, we have a communication, and we work with the site administrator to provide the appropriate communication. And then we ensure that the student or the staff member stays home until they're permitted to return, and we're going to go into detail on that. So then I'm just going to touch very quickly. I'm going to spend more time on our site administrator role, but then we as a designee have roles in this flow chart or steps that we take. And to scroll down, then if our HR administrator will then monitor that isolation period and work with the employee in terms of monitoring that time frame for returning to the site or returning to the workplace. So I'm going to just go back in just a little bit so hopefully you can see this. So then we have a decision tree. So now we have, this is again a student or a staff member who has some symptoms, a positive symptom screen, and we provide guidance around, the site administrator or staff at the district office provides guidance around testing. So if for someone who is symptomatic, they should get the COVID test immediately. And while they're waiting for those results, they maintain that isolation. Once the test is complete and they receive the results, this is again calculating when someone can return. If that test is negative, the student or the staff member returns to work. And again, this is all materials from the county health department, their decisions, not ours. If that test is negative, that the student or the staff member can return to work or school 24 hours after the fever has resolved or the symptoms have improved. If that test is positive, then the student or the staff member completes the full isolation period of 10 days and is at least 24 hours fever-free or resolution of symptoms. So we work with the site to then identify this period of time that the person who is symptomatic is out, whether they are negative or whether they are positive. And then we get into a little bit of more details, sort of if-then scenarios. If the person does not test for some reason, which we can require the test to be completed to come back to our campuses. But if they're not tested, then we treat that person as a positive case and have them complete the full isolation period. If the symptomatic individual, if the doctor does not recommend a test, the individual can return, but we need a detailed doctor's note explaining if these symptoms can be explained by a medical condition, that they've been examined, and that the test is not required. So we're training our staff on these steps. And again, it's all in the name of ensuring that someone is not on campus for the appropriate amount of time so that they're reducing risk of spread. Now I'm going to walk you through just a couple of examples of the tools that Dr. Roy and the team provide to us that we've trained and use with our staff. So we have the health screening tool. Again, our staff complete this, and students who participate in on-campus activities provide information on their health screen. We have isolation and quarantine guidelines for anyone who needs to be isolating and quarantining. And we have the CDC cleaning protocols. And then we're starting, the county has provided many more tools for parents, because you can imagine this is a lot for parents to understand. They're a little more geared towards elementary age students, but many handouts around what do I do if my child has COVID symptoms, has been in close contact. For all of our scenarios, we have tools. And then I think we went through the decision tree around providing guidance on testing, but again, as a symptomatic person in scenario one, you must get tested. We know that there are concerns that folks may wonder, how do I do that? What if I don't have a medical provider? And so we'll provide guidance around free testing, but that is an important step for a symptomatic employee or student. So then we practice. Once we go through the steps of a scenario, we practice with our team, our COVID response team. So we'll work through an example here for scenario one. Let's say a staff member starts feeling ill during the school day and takes a temperature check. This is the symptom that the staff member has exhibited and has a fever of 101. What do our site staff do? Throw it out there, anybody who wants to.
Send them home.
Thank you. Isolate them if it's a student, send them home. What else?
Notify the designee.
Yep.
Get them tested. Order
Thank
them
you.
to get tested.
That's right. So that is really important, that we want that test to happen, and then we track and monitor their isolation period and confirm that they're ready to return. Did I miss a question?
I went to clean the area.
Thank you. Thanks, Trustee Gallagher. That's right. Get those cleaning procedures in place. And then if appropriate, we communicate. Again, we'll leave the forms and letters aside, but we will communicate if appropriate. Okay, so now we'll switch gears and we'll move into scenario two, which is the close contact. And again, we'll zoom in just a little bit here. We'll recall our definition of a scenario two of a close contact is a student or a staff member who has been in close contact with someone who has tested positive for COVID-19. And that means that they've been within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more of someone who has tested positive. So we go through our same sort of focus on the green box. And now if you'll just sort of take a look on your own and then identify what's different here. When we're identifying, we've gotten a phone call and a staff member says, I just found out that my mother tested positive and I saw my mother. What do we do differently when we have identified a close contact?
The delay in testing stands out.
That's right. Thanks for finding that. Yep. So we see really sort of two different things. Now we are focused on quarantine because this is not someone, with all these cases, we basically try to treat them as if they might be positive, but now we're quarantining someone. They're not symptomatic necessarily. And our guidance around getting tested is a little bit different because they're a close contact. We want to make sure that they, if they're we want to find out first if they're symptomatic, and if they are, we treat them as that scenario one and have them test immediately. If they're not, then we encourage them to get that COVID test around day 7. So we want them to be tested in sort of the sweet spot, if possible, where they are the most likely to have an accurate test. So you can imagine that also then takes tracking. We're identifying with the close contact. When was the last time you were in contact with this person, and help them identify that day. And we're tracking to then receive those negative test results. Those are the two biggest differences. And then that's reflected here again in this decision tree. Close contact, we first need to identify, does this person have symptoms? Yes or no? If yes, isolate, be tested immediately. If they do not, then wait 7 days. They'll still complete that quarantine period of 14 days, but we'll have them test around the 7th day of exposure. If they're not tested on the 7th day, because I think that the normal reaction is, oh my goodness, I've been exposed. I'm going to go get tested now. They would need to be tested again. They would need to have a test again at the end, closer to the end of that quarantine period. So I think this is something to just highlight, and folks have wondered, do we need a note? Do we need, is a note needed to return to work or school after the isolation and quarantine period? And it's not. So that's where the tracking is very important, so that we make sure they complete that full time before they return. So again, I just want to recap what we just noted, that if symptomatic, they're tested immediately. If they're asymptomatic, they're tested around day 7. And if not, then they're tested. If they're tested early, then again, that COVID test would be repeated towards the end of the quarantine period. And then just to make things more complicated and potentially more challenging in a school setting is if someone is a close contact and lives in the same household with the person who is positive, we then there will be additional time that is required for someone to quarantine. That could be up to 24 days. So the concept being that if I was in close contact with someone who tested positive, that individual, and we live in the same household and we can't separate, the close contact would need to complete their full isolation period, and then my quarantine begins. So that 24 days. And I think right away that then sort of sends alarm bells as, gosh, how do we do that in the school for students and staff? That is a huge factor in determining any in-person learning opportunities.
We're only going to know that if the student shares that information with us.
That's right. So again, we surface it through a couple of different ways. I mean, through the health screen. So our students or staff are obligated to communicate, again, whether or not they've had any symptoms or if they've had close contact. That's a part of the health screen to identify if they've had any close contact with a confirmed case, or through just any voluntary information. But again, close contacts we can find through a positive case. So that's part of our job, is that if there is a positive case, we identify close contacts from on the campus or in the work environment. So similar, I'll sort of walk you through some of the tools that we have hand out for parents who are, their students have been considered a close contact. This is an example of one of our template letters. I think this is for a positive case, but we have our full set of template letters. And so now we'll practice. We'll dive in again. It's lunch break and an employee receives a phone call from their spouse indicating that their spouse just tested positive for COVID-19. What do you as a site administrator do? What are your steps?
Send them home.
Isolate them, send them home, figure out if they're symptomatic or not, give them instructions on whether to get tested right away if they are symptomatic, or wait 7 days if they're not. And based on that, they have to quarantine for 14 days or remain in isolation for 10.
A+.
Bam. And you call me or someone on my team so we can get this in our tracker and make sure that we can align on dates with you before we have anyone returning. You just summarized that entire decision tree. Thank you. And again, if they're the household contact, that time out would be longer. But so this teacher, sorry, this is the same teacher. This is just the next step. So the teacher goes out and gets tested immediately and gets the negative test back, but they tested too soon. What do you do?
Tell them wait 6 days and do it again.
Yeah, make sure that they've had that again. Again, their doctor would do the same, but we'll need to make sure that we have a true negative for that return. And again, we'll recap here that if it's a household contact, as we're tracking that quarantine period, we'll be prepared for someone to be out up to 24 days. All right, and now we have the real deal. We'll move into scenario 3, where we again have surfaced that we have a staff or a student who has tested positive. Again, I'll just zoom in and we'll look for what are the differences here now when we have a positive case. This is really where we basically identify, do we have a scenario 3 and scenario 2s? So do we have someone who's positive that we obviously need to isolate, send home, but then do we also we need to work to identify close contacts, and we will communicate with those close contacts. So a lot of our work is first just asking questions, getting information. And if there are close contacts, then we number one, after we've identified them, if they are members of a cohort, we will have that cohort close and quarantine, or if they're close contacts on campus, we would begin the quarantine procedures for those close contacts. And then same thing, cleaning, forms, isolation, quarantine guidelines. And this will just walk you through a little bit, again, parent handouts and our tools, but this is a look at our reporting system. So the county portal this is a glimpse at their reporting system where we enter our information. We again, the designee is the primary contact. They provide a phone call right afterwards. And again, we go through all of the same dates and quarantine periods with the county folks. And we enter information for all of the close contacts. So as Dr. Roy was mentioning, if this was in a classroom instruction environment, we would need those seating charts quickly. We would, if it's in a cohort or an athletic environment, we would need those rosters. And again, we have a 4-hour window to be able to provide all of this information to the county. Obviously, if we don't have every bit of detail on close contacts, our priority is reporting the case so that we can activate the county office as we continue to identify any other additional close contacts. Okay, so the final check for understanding, we have an employee who tests positive, or takes a test and the results are positive for COVID-19. What does our site administrator need to do?
I'd like Kiki to answer this question, please.
Okay, well, they isolate, send them home, and figure out if there are any other cohorts that need to be sent home, and then enact the close contact protocol, wherein they would be symptomatic or asymptomatic, and that would go towards the previous decision tree. Clean, let the designee know, send home all appropriate communication.
You got it.
That sounds about right.
And I'm going to pause us there. I think what we've found is, obviously these scenarios make it look like it is, real life doesn't always fit perfectly in scenarios, but we work very hard with all of the site administrators when they receive any kind of question or any information from any student, that we really work to identify what's the scenario and what are your steps. I think though the number one sort of case or issue that we grapple with that are not identified here in these scenarios are close contacts of close contacts. So we often, somebody will get a call of, oh, I was exposed to someone. And when you really identify, it's, I know I was in contact, or I was around someone who was around someone. And so, right, if close contacts of close contacts, there is no action that we are required to take, but it often requires, again, that interview, the question, the details. As of right now, our county guidance is that there is no action for close contacts of close contacts.
Meredith, what do you know about the availability of free testing?
Well, the free testing, again, I think we showed the website, the county website, and there is consistent free testing through the county. I've participated, I've taken a county test myself and a Kaiser to be able to experience and know what these experiences are like so that our employees are comfortable with it. And they're consistent, the free testing. We try to communicate as much as we can when we know about, especially if we have testing at the county office. But routine testing is another topic that we'll share with you probably more information about, but that is something that we're working towards, is that more surveillance routine testing that can be done on site for staff.
What do we have in our district area? If you have to drive over to Burger Drive, I know they have a testing site at the ROV, the county office. That's a corner of town that's a little problematic to get to.
Yeah, I think the recommendation from our public health department is really to go to your medical provider, to have them go first. Go there first. Their health order requires that all medical providers are providing that test, so they should not be turned away. But again, those free tests are if you don't have one, a medical provider, or if you need to access a free test. So that really, I think the guidance that we start with first is please go to your doctor. If that's not possible, then here's how you go about. If you're symptomatic, you need to go to this location. If you're not symptomatic, you need to go to this location. They do change, but I think it's pretty, we've done, I mean, the county has done just a lot of work around getting testing availability.
And Meredith, I think early on you mentioned curative. And I just want to bring that back up for the board, that the county, that the County Office of Education has worked with an organization, a company called Curative, and set up a countywide contract that we can and have joined onto. And with Curative, we would be able to do on-site tests.
How do you spell that?
CURATIVE, I believe.
Curative,
Mm-hmm.
like curative properties of aloe. Curative, okay.
So I'm going to say thank you all for engaging on a late night and participating in that. But hopefully you got a little bit of the taste of the experience. What I tell the team, or the team often responds after the training, is confidence is higher, knowledge is higher, and confidence is higher. But they often feel like they need to just keep working. So we are doing regular practice. We're starting to do regular practice, and sort of weekly we will be rolling out weekly or regular check for understanding quiz, pop quiz. We call it all different things, but where we're really practicing and implementing these the steps of these scenarios, because it is building muscle memory so that we can be very speedy in our responses. So thank you guys for participating.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, Dr. Barber, what's the next step? Questions from the board? Do you have more?
I just wanted to make a few comments and then have questions from the board. Thank you, Meredith, for going through that. And, on the one hand, it seems kind of straightforward. There's the flow chart, just do what the flow chart says. But, partially sometimes we want to be so conscientious and don't want to get it wrong that even something that's very clearly stated in front of us, we still worry about, right? And people will call Meredith, am I doing it right? And she has to assure them, yes, or actually tell them, well, no, actually you need to go back to the flow chart. So, it's like many things in life, simple yet hard, right? And I think the challenge for you as trustees over the, next couple of weeks is to really think around this issue of level of risk. And what, if any, is the acceptable level of risk? So if we're going to go at the premise, if we go at the premise that we would not want to do anything that added any level of risk to anyone, we would do less than we're doing now, right? The cohorts that coaches are working with, conditioning, we'd say no. The connectivity the connectivity hubs that we have, we would say no. Down the line, that's one end. Then, of course, the level of risk is the more folks you bring back, the more time you have them on campus, and all those kinds of things. A higher sense of risk. So this isn't an easy one for sure, because we have the short-term knowledge that what we do now will increase risk now, and what we can't quantify exactly, and what's harder for us to quantify, is what, if any, are going to be the long-term consequences for those students who are struggling in distance learning. If that is to continue on for a long period of time, what will the long-term consequences of that be? And in the public health world, we know that people that do not graduate high school have shorter life expectancies than people that do. Now it's a chicken and the egg problem, I'm sure, in part, but I don't want us to think that education and educational outcomes are not another piece of public health. So no easy answer on this one. And it's something that I think, you know, each one of you will have to contemplate and to think on. I am a parent myself, and there was a time in which I would have definitely sent my son back if the school allowed it. He's 8. Then I kind of throttled back for a while. Well, maybe not. And then go back towards, well, yeah, I should, right? Again, no easy answer, but I want to, in as much as possible, try and give you the information that you need to try and make an informed decision. And so I would love to hear if there's anything in particular information that you hope that that I can get to you over the next couple of months. And I especially can't wait to hear from the student board members, because we had a conversation the other day and ooh, they got opinions. I know they do. They're fooling you though. They're just being quiet and smiling now.
Dr. Bravo, is there a metric that we would need to have in place if we do a hybrid model, which is what percentage of positive tests would be the trigger for a return to distance learning? In other words, there have been a couple of schools that tried it and then had to shut it down. Would we go into it, if we were going to do that, with a predetermined threshold past which we wouldn't go if we started having positives show up?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Isn't that part of the guidance?
It isn't though. Right.
Isn't
So
there something in there about you had to shut down a school if X% of the population had tested positive, and then you have to shut down the district if 25% of the schools were shut down? I think I read that.
I saw that somewhere. Yeah.
There's a 5%, but it's not our county guidance. I believe it is actually from the state, but 5% of staff and students positive in terms of closing a school.
Yeah, and it would seem to me that if it was that 25%, if we had to close a school because of an outbreak, we would probably have to close the district. We'd have to close all the schools because of that second requirement, if that's really what the requirement is. That's the way I read it.
well, but at the same time, you know, we moved to this new tiering system, right? And you can, and if you, and the new tiering system says, if you're in the red, if you are get to the red, if you were purple, here, I'll go take it back. If you were purple or the worst off with the highest case rates, but you moved to red and you stayed in red for 14 days, you can operate school. And even if the county falls back to purple, you don't necessarily have to close school. And so that's what there are sort of like, again, sort of mixed messages out there. And ultimately, if there's any standard that we would be interested in, you know, locally, I mean, we could do that. We could have some kind of a local decision related to that. But as Dr. Roy said, I wrote it down, so let me see if I can. Oh, I think she said, she was talking about case rates and said, well, 6 cases out of 20 students would be horrible, right? But 6 out of 20,000, that's great. Well, it's all relative, right? Because I know for many of us, we'd say 6 out of 20,000 is great. It's too much, right? 1 is too much. So, and that's the, doing focus groups with staff, one of the staff members that I talked to said, we need to make this decision based on science. And I said, I absolutely agree. And I said, but here's the hard part. Science doesn't tell us level of risk to accept. Science is telling us that if we are going to come back, these are the ways we should do it to mitigate risk. But there is no pope of science. There is no singular scientist that all other scientists, you know, will salute to and say, yep, if that scientist says it, then that's the right answer. So again, any information in particular that you all would like to be provided to you in the next couple of weeks as we go forward.
Well, science also doesn't tell us the efficacy of moving from a model that is finally beginning to work pretty smoothly to, once again, something really new and different, and having our teachers do both distance learning and the in-person simultaneously, and in classrooms that are going to be a long, long way from normal. It will not be like a normal classroom. So I'm a little puzzled about whether this board is supposed to make a purely science-related decision, or if we have to consider some other intangibles in terms of, you know, methodology and weighing what could be a very mixed bag methodology against getting students out of a certain degree of isolation. So I think that it is also a very, that one's going to keep me up at night for the rest of the month. There's no question about it. So for me, it just can't be a purely science-based decision. I view that as sort of the floor that has to be underneath any other part of the decision. What are the rest of you?
I agree, because again, ultimately science isn't going to tell us. They're going to advise us. They're going to talk about in terms of risk mitigations.
I think related to that, oh, sorry, were you still?
No.
Oh, I think related to that, I know that it's probably not abundant, but any information on, you know, student outcomes and cases for, you know, other areas or any schools that have adopted hybrid learning through even, you know, last spring or this fall, as much as possible, just kind of what's out there and what do we know, if anything, from the different models?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's true that the research is not going to be particular guiding us here. The only thing that I would say is that to those areas in which we do expect a certain amount of research showing efficacy, in fairness, if we're going to apply it to any one model, we should apply it to all models. So if we're going to say, well, where's the research that a hybrid would be better than what we're doing now, you can also say, well, what's the research that what we're doing now would be better than hybrid? You can turn it. They're very fair questions to ask. I just think that you have to apply the same standard to all models. So I'm definitely interested in, there's right now it's very anecdotal. It's very anecdotal. You know, there was a story in Ed Week, I think about a week ago. It was a day in the life of a hybrid teacher. And if you go online and you look it up, there's lots of teachers who have been doing hybrid type instruction, mostly in other parts of the country, not California, but other parts of the country, who are written about their experiences. And some will say they absolutely hate it. And this one in Ed Week last year, the person wrote, well, I wish I was just teaching one mode or the other, either purely in person or just distance learning. But for this particular teacher, they concluded with, but it's worth it because I see kids thriving, right now. So it's all very anecdotal in terms of results on the part of students. And, you know, again, to just, you know, remind us of the report that Herman and Meredith gave us previously, that's a school where they're having some in-person instruction. And yes, they have the desks and the plexiglass and whatever, but at least anecdotally, you know, the folks at that school, the administrators say, hey, we've got like 100% attendance. And we know that we don't have 100% attendance with online learning.
So, so Bob, you know, when you talk about level of risk, what level of risk should we accept? I'm not sure that's really the way we should be looking at it, because there's going to be risk. And I think one of the things that Dr. Roy talked about was we're going to have cases if we increase the number of people that we have on campuses. We are going to have cases. So I'm more interested in kind of that quantifiable risk assessment, which basically says we know here's all the things that could happen, right? And then, you know, what the impact is and what the probability is, and then what's the mitigation, because that's how you manage the risk, right? So we know that we increase the risk of transmission. So, you know, here's something that could happen. And if it were to happen, it would be catastrophic. But the probability of it happening is really slight. So that helps kind of, you know, help us manage that risk. And I think that's more of how we have to look at this, as opposed to, you know, is 6 cases out of 8,400 okay with you guys? Because that's kind of I think that's an untenable.
Thank you. It's well said. I didn't mean to suggest that you guys would actually say, we will accept, you know, this.
Yeah, no, but that's what I'm saying. But
yeah.
We have to, you know, part of this is to help inform the community and help them be okay with or accept the decision that we make on December 1st.
Yeah.
The second thing,
and we will, and you know, I will be on the lookout for that information as best as we can. But you know, as Dr. Roy, you asked her the question tonight, and she would say, we don't know that. We don't have that.
Right. The second thing that I'm interested in terms of, you know, for our 12-1 meeting is what is a readiness assessment from us in terms of how well we're ready to deploy or to meet these requirements. And I think the exercise that we went through tonight with Meredith kind of taking us through, here's the guidelines, here's the things that are put in place and things like that. And by the way, if, you know, I'm glad Kiki was here because if you had to rely on me to be a site administrator to deploy any of these things, we'd be in a lot of trouble. I know that our principals, they do amazing things every day, but some type of readiness assessment on being able to move forward with the requirements. And then, you know, to the point, you know, I would classify a lot of the teacher feedback into 2 areas. One is, you know, risk of COVID, of catching COVID. And that's coming a lot more from people who are in higher risk, people who are immunosuppressed or have, living with older parents and things like that. But the second piece is that this whole transition into a new teaching model. And so I'm going to go back to include that piece of it in a readiness assessment. I think one thing we know for certain about spring semester, I think I can say it here tonight with certainty, is that there will be distance learning in the spring semester continuing. And we should expect that it will continue to improve, right? What we do in the spring will be better than what we did in the fall, because we have all these learnings and people are getting used to it, you know, all that kind of stuff. But as we introduce, if we introduce hybrid, in person, whatever model it is, we're going back to spring 2020 when we had a Apollo 13 distance learning. And so I would want us to be able to go through some type of readiness assessment before we know we can really even start to do, you know, that hybrid model. That's kind of what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I'm just going to add in though that not necessarily. So it's not a new teaching model if by hybrid what we mean is the student takes some classes in person and some remote. The teacher's teaching in one of the two modes that they know. It's those simultaneous models where, you know, you're trying to simulcast. That is new. But hybrid learning is not necessarily asking people to do a new mode of instruction. Now, that being said, the reorganization model is super disruptive. And there's arguments against that too that I've tried to explain. But
right, but for me, and this is, I'm one board member kind of talking about what my decision-making process is that, you know, if it's going to be disruptive, I want to know how ready we are to deal with the disruption, because I think it does harm to kind of go back to that, you know, maybe controlled chaos mode at a transition like this. And then the third thing and my last thing is that I want to make sure that we're solving the right problem, right? Because we've been so focused on the solution of returning to in-person instruction. And I want to make sure that that's really solving the right problem, because, you know, what I've been hearing in terms of what the issues are our students and maybe even our staff are, you know, the social isolation of shelter in place. We're social beings and we want to be around people. You know, and I know this myself is that, you know, when I go out and have dinner with somebody, socially distanced, safe, outside and all other stuff, it improves my mood. I feel good. So there's that piece that we want to solve. There's the, I've been hearing about students struggling with just the time management of doing everything at home. They don't necessarily catch the cues for when it's time to just do your homework, start your class, turn in your homework, things like that. And then the last piece is, you know, we have this increase in failing, you know, in academic performance, right? In our failing grades and things like that. So, and that's just my example, but I want to make sure that what we end up doing in the spring are solutions that are going to actually solve the problems that have been reported to us, that we know about, that we're trying to resolve. And that the recommendation for how we operate in the spring is doing that. You know, so if basically we're saying, well, yes, we're going to return to in-person learning for those who want to have in-person learning, you know, does it really solve the problem that we've identified? Or are there other solutions that maybe have more manageable risk that we could be looking at that resolve those problems? Does that make sense, Bob? You're kind of looking at me like, what the hell did you just say?
no, it does.
Yeah.
I mean, it does. I would just, again, say I understand that, but I would just say again, though, that we would need to apply, I think if we were going to be rigorous about it, though, we would apply the same standards to any particular model.
Agreed.
Yeah. Stacy, I like what you said a lot. Look at the problem rather than just assuming that any one path is the answer to those problems. I also want to know, before we consider a hybrid model, what our capacity is going to be. And I don't know that we have the numbers yet on that, but at some point we're going to need to know, do we have capacity in our budget for additional staff? If a large number of our teachers just say, we're not comfortable and I'd like to go on leave, or I want to continue doing distance learning, what's our capacity to add people to be able to offer both models if that should occur? I mean, I think that this is also a numbers game, and we're going to need at some point some numbers commitments, you know, so that we know what's possible.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily what we want to do, but so that we know what's possible.
Absolutely, and that's why we have, given a new check for teachers, asking them to, not a survey of comfort level, but actually to pin down, if this was to happen, what would be your intention? And I know that probably for some receiving that, it was a scary thing if they really feel like they don't want to come back.
I'm sorry. The scary thing was Robert's head slowly coming up above the bottom of his seat. It was a very Vincent Price moment. I'm sorry. I was totally distracted. So,
but at the same time, though, I feel like I owe it to you all to have that information. And I think I've mentioned this before, that there are some districts that were moving towards a hybrid and called it off for staffing reasons. They said, you know what, we can't staff it. And it's not just the responses of our current teachers, but also the size of the subpool. Right now, the size of the subpool does not have a great impact, but it would have a huge impact if we were to return to in person. So when I give a recommendation to you all, I'm not just going to have a singular recommendation and then put you all in a position of it's take it or leave it. I think I'm going to paint a picture of at least 4 different menu options, for lack of a better term, and share with you the pros and cons of each, both the pros and cons logistically, the pros and cons of effect on students, the pros and cons effect on staff, the costs, the fiscal ramification, pros and cons on several different fronts. Now, I think I do owe you a singular recommendation, though, amongst those. I'm not just going to say, oh, here's 4 models. You guys just tell me what to do, and I'll just, just call me back in when you're decided. No, I mean, I think I owe you to tell you which one I think would be the most ideal. And it could be very well, and I think the chances are not small, that I could make a recommendation. I could say, I wanted to recommend menu item number 2, but the barriers to implementation are too great, so I'm recommending item number 3. So that's the approach that I intend to follow.
All right, so we heard from 2 board members on that question. There's 3 board members, 2 student board members. You all have any thoughts? If not, I can jump in.
Or Robert can hear from some students.
Sorry, Stacy, you have something?
I had one more thing that I was going to share that I know for certain is going to happen. And that's that after we make our decision on 12/1, there are going to be people that are not happy with our decision. And what I'm hoping is that we're going to come together as a community and support what we do. And, because we have to be bigger than the individual. This is what I want for my kids. This is what I want for whatever. So I just wanted to put that out there in advance and for people to start thinking about that.
And I thought you were going to say whatever you do on December 1 will be subject to change December 2, which is also a very...
I think that there's a high probability of that, but I don't think I can say that with certainty.
Yes, very, very fair.
But yes, and I would love to hear from our student board members as well.
And so the question on the table is just things that you're curious about, or things that you would like to know as we approach that discussion.
Sorry, there's just so many new thoughts coming in. Yeah, I guess just more of my concerns in terms of like moving forward is just the whole, two system approach, or one person, how that would really mess with kind of the student learning, I guess. Like, I feel like there would still be a disparity between the ones that get to go in person, the ones that get to be online, like regardless of what we try, I guess. And then I also just worry if one person got COVID, like, am I just quarantined for 2 weeks, then everyone else is in person, like, and then like, oh, I was walking with my friend in the hall and now he has to quarantine for 2 weeks, but then some friends don't want to admit it, some don't. So I guess I'm just a little bit worried about like some of those small things in terms of how it would just mess with, I guess, just the students' overall education. But, in terms of just how I think, and from the student side and like how things have been going, is there are a lot of students like really struggling right now. And, I know it's really tough for everyone, but there are some people that really need that in-person environment and are really not able to do the same level of work at home. And there's a good chance we get way more people that drop out next semester, or do not graduate, or do not get on pace, or have to take another year. And I think there is just something to be said about getting those people on campus could make a huge difference. And that's where I like when Dr. Bravo goes with the long-term impact. And I think there are quite a few kids in our district right now where that long-term impact can be quite severe. And so I know there's so many tricky parts. There's so much to manage. I mean, we've been talking for 2 hours about all the safety protocols and everything. But I think there are a lot of students in the district that at least we can try and get them to come back. And I think it would really make a difference.
Yeah, just kind of echoing what Riley said. It's just been a lot to take in. It's a lot of learning. I didn't really realize how nuanced this whole process could become. But kind of just agreeing where I know Dr. Bravo mentioned this last semester when we were kind of talking about it, where students who were doing well did better and students who weren't doing well did worse. And I feel like that anecdote still holds true today, just kind of hearing how students are handling distance learning. It works for some, it doesn't work for others. And I really we need to make sure that we are strategizing for a solution that works for those it doesn't work right now. And so I do think we need to be smart with reopening and really make sure those students who need it most are coming back. But then again, there's a lot of things that are left in the air. I do request that when we are talking about distance learning, like Stacy mentioned, distance learning is going to happen in whatever solution that we choose, that the students are a little bit more involved in that process. I think as students can give a lot of valuable feedback, since we have been dealing with it for the entire semester and we kind of know at this point what works and what doesn't. So especially in that regards, just involving us a little bit more so we can make sure that next semester can work for a few more students in case that we choose distance learning for most people again this semester.
All right, I'll jump in. So I think for me, top questions or things I don't understand yet, or things that I think I'm interested in knowing more about. I think I start from a place, I think I said in one of the first meetings, right? I think these students are going to have irreparable harm for the rest of their lives based on not being able to be in person in school. It's not anyone here's fault. It's the pandemic's fault, right? And so I think as we see that play out in the social emotional health of our students, in the grades of our students, and their ability to like learn new content that's going to set them up for the next thing they want to do, that's the thing I'm most interested in minimizing that harm, right? And so, I think we've heard a couple times that, oh, well, we're starting to figure out distance learning and it's working smoothly. But is that true? Does data support that? The stories of our students support that? I don't know, right? It could be very true. It could be very false. I don't know the answer to that question, but yeah, is it getting better or not? I think I'm also really interested in just what is happening with others, what's happening in our feeder districts, right? I know some of our feeders are planning to go back just kindergarten through second for a while because it's hard to do 7th and 8th grade. So what is their plan? I know 2 districts in the county have already said they're not coming back at all in person in a hybrid model this school year. What is that number going to look like as we move forward? And I think also, I've heard from, I think by my calculation, around 40% of teachers have sent direct emails or broad letters to us saying we either will not come back or we do not want to come back. Don't do this. So I guess understanding what happens in a world in which teachers sick out or teachers strike over something like this, what have districts done? If they come down and think that is in the best interest of kids, but there's not a willing participant in our family, right? What does that look like? And is that level of drama worth a potential small added benefit of being back in person? Or, that calculation, I think, is something that's top of mind for me. And then I think the third one is, if it is not hybrid, sorry, I thought I heard something. If it's not hybrid, what else is it, right? I think the emails we're getting from students and parents seem to kind of fall in 3 categories, right? One is, I'm not learning content, I'm failing, I'm at risk of not graduating or not being set up for the rest of my high school career, for college career, for job career, whatever it is. 2 is just like this deep pain around social emotional health that our students are facing, that I don't think any of us can begin to understand what it's like to be a teen going through this. And then 3rd is there's some kids who are probably fine on both, but they miss the social aspects of high school, and just their high school experience, which is the defining experience in American culture, is being ripped away from them, right? And I don't know if we can recreate prom or recreate those things that you remember for the rest of your life and you watch in high school movies growing up, but are there things we can do, whether it's hybrid or not, that directly push against those things and help solve them? Kind of to Stacy's point, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And the last thing I'll say is I'm going to approach this where I might have radically different views than each and every person on the dais, right? The virtual dais. And that's okay, right? I don't think there's a right. There's a lot of answers here, and I think I respect each and every one of you to bring your experience into it. So I'm just going to try to approach with, here's my perspective, here's what I think, and kind of see where it goes from there.
Kaylin, may I'd like to add to something you said, or maybe. I think I want to try to take a step to correct an impression that you may not have meant to give, because right after you said we'd heard from about 40% of our teachers, you mentioned the word strike. I don't want to see our deliberations deepen any kind of a divide that may be shaping up between our parents and our teachers, because we do have a number of parents who feel very, very strongly that they want their students to return to school, and that the impediment is the fear that teachers have. And so I do want to state for the record that I read through all of those emails over the last 2 days again very carefully. I didn't find any of them threatening or belligerent or anything but thoughtful and detailed. They were giving us their rationale for their points of view. And I thought they were doing it perfectly respectfully. So I just want to say that so we don't create the impression that we've got teachers emailing us and saying, I won't do this or I won't do that. That is not at this point the case.
Yeah, and I think just to go deeper on that, and thank you for correcting, because as you know,
I didn't want to correct, but I just don't think you meant to kind of.
yeah, no, exactly. Well, I think
yeah.
like when you look at the school in Orange County, right? When you read
Yeah.
the articles, it was going to be a strike situation, and then it wasn't, right? I think when you look at other districts around the country that are looking at, that is something that is on the table in the media, in the discussions with those districts. And so while I've not seen very strong signs of that here in our district, I have seen 40% of our teachers email us saying, please don't make us go back.
Right.
Right. And so like, I think that's the nuance, I think. And I'm being sincere. Thank you. Because I'm not trying to.
No, I knew that you weren't. That's why I said that. Yeah.
How do districts overcome that if that is the decision that they make?
Well, I personally, I think that when people trust the process that we go through, they can accept the outcomes more readily. And so I keep talking about, personally, I have a lot of confidence and trust in the process we've gone through since March 13th, when this got dumped on our lap. I think that the process that we've gone through, and we're just continuing on and improving on, that came up with our decision for what to do about fall semester. We went through a lot of learn, focus, recommend. And so we're just doing that here. So I think that's going to be really important. I think that, and like I said, there are going to be people that are just not going to be happy with whatever decisions we make on December 1st. And we have to help them move forward with us.
All right, so I think we have 2 trustees we've not heard from yet. So if you have things you'd like to know or questions that you have for Dr. Bravo.
I think the one thing that stands out in my mind is the trip I had to Florida, where in Disney World, there was 100% participation in wearing PPE. There was staff reminding people. I saw one person, and there were lots of rules you had to follow, lots. And that's not what Disney World's about, but they changed what operations look like. They changed, and I don't know if I said this in a board meeting, but like there was no scheduled parades, but there was pop-up parades, and they were very short to keep people from congregating, right? And I thought that was a really good idea, and it seemed to work. We're not going to have parades, but maybe we have some different passing periods, or whatever that looks like. They just had implemented so many things to make it work. And then I landed here, and Gavin Newsom had just said, Disneyland's not opening. It's not going to happen. And I just experienced that it all went well. Like, I was there for 4 days. I didn't get COVID, but I didn't feel at risk either. There were so many pieces to it. And all of the kids were wearing their masks. And if somebody started to bring it down below their nose, there was usually a staff member that said, put that back up, and I just didn't see mass not following the rules. People knew that there were rules to participate, and they followed them. It's just one piece that I have that I thought was important to share. Everything that everybody else has said is enough. I don't need to repeat what we've heard. There's lots of things that I'm listening to and hearing. And the fact that 40% of our teachers, and I would agree it's about that number, doesn't mean I need to hear from the other 60%. I'm pretty certain that we've done some surveys. We know it's around 75% that are concerned. And so, but I encourage us hearing what they have to say, as well as the parents and the students. So I'd agree with what we heard today from the rest of you.
All right, anything else?
And then lastly, I want to apologize that I distracted Linda by having my sit-stand desk go down, but my back couldn't take it anymore.
Probably ADD as a kid. I'm easily distracted.
All right.
So Bob, do you have, you guys have been working very, very hard on learning and getting ready and making plans and things like that. Are you confident you're on track to be able to start socializing your recommendations to the LCAP committee and then to us and be ready for a 12-1 decision point?
Yes.
So glad I'm not you.
Yeah, I wish I weren't me either. No, I mean, no, actually, I mean, that's not true. These are hard things, but we can do it. And again, my recommendation could end up being like, it's status quo. That I know people really want to sort of push me to like, but what's it going to be? What's it going to be? And I'm really just still trying to say, I'm gonna take in every new piece of information I can before I give a recommendation, and it'll be a recommendation that the next day I could say, you know what, I was wrong. And I know that that's frustrating for some folks. And I think when Trustee Gallagher and we did a Facebook Live for parents the other day, and I think one of the people in there, they put the comment in there, why are you learning? I don't want to hear about you learning from other places. I want you leading. And, I understand the sentiment, but here's the problem. What happens when leading means making a decision you don't like, right? So it's sort of like, we have the fascination with the strongman leader, but if he does something we don't like, he's an evil dictator, right? So, I know that people, might feel like, well, just figure it out, just get creative and just figure it out. And I wish it were that simple, but this is a complex issue that I take seriously, and I know you will all take very seriously. Because we're talking about potential harms that at the end of the day are extremely difficult, if not impossible, to completely quantify. But I appreciate your comments, and we'll do the best I can to supply you the information that you need.
Great. Yeah, and thank you, Meredith, today for hopping on, doing the presentation, for getting someone from the Department of Health to come and talk to us. And I think just for the whole process, I know you spent many hours on this so far and many more to come. So we all really appreciate it. And we appreciate it so much, we might make a move to adjourn at exactly 9 p.m.
Except I want to ask Riley a question first because it's driving me nuts. Riley, you're flying the Union Jack, but it's got lettering on it. What is it?
The Who.
It's the Who. It's the band
I
poster.
thought it was the Who. Okay. I like you even better tonight. Well done.
I seconded.
And sorry, okay, so there is a motion. Did Stacy make it?
Yeah.
And then Christina has seconded, but I think Robert has something.
I just wanted to add thanks to the administrative team that's practicing getting their muscle memory up and going through these processes to figure out what works or what they need to know.
All right. Any more discussion? All right, so the motion is to adjourn. Can we please have a roll call vote?
Trustee Gallagher?
Aye.
Trustee Aerosmith?
Aye.
Trustee Brown?
Aye.
Trustee Guitia?
Hi.
Trustee Verich?
Aye.
All right, 5-0. We're adjourned at 9:01 p.m. 9:02. Thank you, everyone, and have a good Thanksgiving.